administrator, this is one of the largest topics that we get questions on, and also one of the most consequential when it comes to safety, when it comes to mental health, and when it comes to just facilitating education for all of our students. So I want to introduce some of the people that are in the room before we introduce our esteemed speaker. Our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Dr. Samantha Alaima, which many of you know. Also, Mr. Chris Lilly, Director of Communications. If you like any of the videos or any of the emails, easy read them. Mr. Matt Toombs, our Director of Technology and everything going on with this program. He helped facilitate this and did a great job of researching that. And then we also have a couple board members here tonight. Ms. Phyllis Levinsky in the back and Ms. Rachel Georgakis right there. So I just really appreciate their support too and helping us do this. Parent University is back. So we've got 4 events this year, and Dr. Alaima will just kind of take you through the rest of them at the end of the evening. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Toombs to introduce. Thank you.
All right, good evening everyone. So as Dr. Collins said, my name is Matt Toombs. I'm the Director of Innovation and Technology here in the school district. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Justin Patchin. Dr. Patchin is a professor of criminal justice at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, as well as a co-founder and co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center. He's a leading expert in cyberbullying and social networking, and has spoken to audiences all over the world about this topic. His research has been published in a lot of academic journals, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. He also appeared on CNN, NPR, and has an opportunity to speak at the White House as well as the FBI. He's passionate about helping parents and educators understand the risks and the benefits associated to technology used by youth. He's a frequent speaker at schools and conferences across the country, and he's also authored 9 books, including Bullying Beyond the Schoolyard, Preventing and Responding to Cyberbullying. So tonight, Dr. Patchin will be talking to us about the importance of internet and social media safety for our children, which is why you're all here. He'll discuss the risks associated with the students face online, as well as strategies that you as parents and we as educators can use to talk to our children about internet safety. So please help me welcome Dr. Patchin.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Well, good evening. How are we all doing? Doing okay? At least above average. My name is Justin Patchin. I do teach at UW-Eau Claire. That's my day job, teaching criminal justice and kind of pre-law classes. But my research since about 2000 has been how young people use and misuse technology. And because I'm a criminologist by training, I sometimes focus more on the negative than the positive, but I think we also need to recognize the amazing, wonderful, positive things that young people can do with technology as well. I'm also a dad of a teenager, of a 13-year-old, so it's been interesting studying these things for years and years and years, and now I'm living them with my own teenager at home, and so it's kind of a different perspective. That's him actually right there a couple of years ago. So I wrote a blog post a couple of years ago about his first iPhone or his first smartphone, and so I said, all right, you're staring at this thing, I'm going to take a picture, and then that's going to be the picture for the blog post. But what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to probably talk for about 45 minutes or so, cover a number of different issues that I've been encountering in my research. But then I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. You know, if you have certain issues that you're dealing with at home or questions about technology and your particular family, I'm happy to at least attempt to address them or at least give you my perspective. Now, the one thing about technology is it's moving so fast, right? It's constantly changing. And from my perspective, that's a double-edged sword because it's constantly changing, so it's hard to keep up. I mean, it's got to be hard for you as parents to keep up with what your kids are interested in online because it's hard for me to keep up, and I live and breathe this stuff. So it's hard to keep up, but it also makes it interesting because, as much as I study these things, there's always a new app, a new game, a new environment, and what I typically do to keep track of what the most popular spaces are online is I just follow the cats, because once the cats take over, then it's got to be something popular because there's all these new apps that come out probably literally every day. I will also say I think it's harder, I think it's more difficult for us as parents today than when we were growing up, right? Because I don't know about you, I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota. But when I grew up, my parents would give me a rule, right? It's like, don't get in strangers' cars. That's probably pretty good advice, right? And then, things change, right? Technology comes around. It's like, well, don't meet people on the internet. So your parents give you a rule, and I'm a rule follower, so I just follow the rule. But now what has technology done? Basically, we literally summon strangers from the internet and we get in their cars, right? So we can't trust, well, let me put it this way. We can't rely on rules alone. We can't just tell our kid, I don't want you using Snapchat. I don't want you going to this app or playing this game, because maybe they won't use Snapchat. They'll go to this other app that you've never heard of, or you didn't prohibit me from using this app. So instead of giving our kids, these rules, we have to give them principles, guiding principles that can be applied to all of the different environments that they may, encounter, or may spend time on, because these environments are constantly changing, right? All right, so I want you to look at this list of icons. And I'm not going to call anybody out here, okay? But I want you to think about how many of these you could name, okay? And again, I'm not going to call anybody out, but raise your hand if you think you could name more than half of them. Anybody could name more than half of them? Nobody? Okay. Could anybody name? Let's start easy. 2 of them. Can you name 2 of them? All right. 3. All right. There you go. 4. And after 4, I lose most of you. 5. Can you name 5? A few. 5. Okay. So when I show this to high school students, they can name usually 8 or 9 of them on average. These are all super popular apps, really popular apps, but they do vary in popularity in different parts of the country. Like some of them might not be all that popular here, whereas they'll be super popular somewhere else. And I could spend the next hour telling you what each one is and why it's good, why it's bad, what the problems are, but that's not really all that helpful, because I could come back here next year or 2 years from now and some of these would be dead and there'll be new ones that will arrive. So again, focusing too much on a particular app is a losing game of whack-a-mole, instead focusing on more general principles. I do want to give you some general statistics just to sort of provide some context for what we're about to talk about. So every second, there's about 1,100 pictures and videos uploaded to Instagram. Every second. That seems like a lot, right? 1,000, 1,100 of these every second. Well, there's 60,000 snaps sent through Snapchat every single second. That's a lot of snapping, right? That's a lot of stuff. That seems like a lot, right? Well, how many of you guys use WhatsApp? Do you know WhatsApp, right? Well, 750,000 messages are sent via WhatsApp every second. So that's a lot of content that's being shared, sent, and in some cases we know where that's ending up. Some cases we know who we're sending these to, and it can create some issues. Facebook stores more than 300 petabytes of user data. Anybody know what a petabyte is? Anybody? No?
1,000 terabytes.
1,000 terabytes is correct. A million gigabytes. A million gigabytes. That's correct. Very good. So it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around how much a petabyte is, right? A million gigabytes. That seems like a lot, right? The way it was explained to me was, let's say you really like music, okay? And you've got a 1 petabyte hard drive that's stuffed with all your favorite songs, okay? That's a lot of music. So you got 1 petabyte of music. If you put that music in a playlist, okay, and you pushed play, the playlist wouldn't stop for 2,000 years. Right? So that's 1 petabyte, and Facebook's got more than 300 of these. Okay? And you might say, well, that's fine. I'm not on Facebook. Well, it's not Facebook anymore, right? What is it? It's Meta, right? And Meta is not only Facebook, it's Instagram, it's WhatsApp, it's Oculus, right? It's these VR headsets, and so all that content is now being collected and stored. And I'm sure, like me, you trust that Meta will use your information responsibly and protect your privacy. Why do they have that data? Well, it's because that's where the money is, right? That's where the money is that content. That's where they make all their money. TikTok has an estimated 1.7 billion users. The stat that I used to have in here was 1 out of every 3 US adults is on TikTok. But then the TikTok CEO was called to testify before Congress a few months ago. I don't know if you remember this, about some of the concerns. And he said in his testimony that 1 out of every 2 U.S. adults is on TikTok. Any of you not on TikTok? Never been to TikTok? Okay, we'll see how long that lasts. Yeah. My 71-year-old mother loves TikTok. I bet in the time that I'm speaking with you, she will text me a link to a TikTok video. She watches them constantly. It's like dogs doing crazy things and funny or whatever. TikTok is a very sticky app. I first went on TikTok, and this was before it was TikTok, it was Musical.ly. This is going back to like 2018, 2019. I didn't get it. Short videos, I'm watching them. I didn't get it, right? Then the pandemic happens, and I could see that TikTok is gaining a lot of popularity in early 2020. And I thought, well, I got to check this out again because I need to keep track of what young people are doing online. And within about an hour, I was like, 3 hours later, I was still watching TikToks. The reason TikTok is so popular is because they figure out pretty quickly the kind of videos you like to watch, and they serve you up more of that. With YouTube, it takes longer because they're longer videos. But especially when TikTok first came out, it was these 30-second, 1-minute videos. You can get through a lot of videos in an hour. They figure out what you like. They give you more of it. So I get a lot of, I've learned about 10 magic tricks from TikTok. If anybody got a deck of cards, I could show you some magic tricks. I coach hockey, so I like see hockey drills for youth, and it's amazing all the things you can learn. So they figure out what you like. So if you ever have somebody come up to you and say, "Oh, TikTok, that's just a bunch of tweens doing these silly dances," A, that person's never been on TikTok. Or B, what's the alternative? That's what they're watching, right? That's what they like to watch because that's what TikTok is serving them. So if you've never been on TikTok, careful because it is actually a pretty entertaining app. There are some, of course, concerns about privacy and where the data they collect is going, particularly because its parent company is a Chinese company, so there's some concerns about privacy there. But obviously, half of American adults don't seem to care about that, and almost 2 billion people in the world, like a third of people in the world don't care about that either. YouTube is the world's second most visited website. Anybody know what number 1 is?
Google.
Google's correct. Does anybody know who owns YouTube? Google's also correct, yeah. So that's another kind of lesson learned or something we need to keep in mind. There are, hundreds of billions of websites out there, right? But the vast majority of all the fun places we're going online are controlled by a handful of companies, right? It's Google, it's Meta, it's Apple, and they're basically fighting for our eyeballs and our money, right? So these days, so this is a survey done by Piper Sandler. They do it twice a year. They survey youth about culture and different things. They also ask them about their favorite social media platform, and TikTok's been at the top for the last few years. These three are neck and neck for their favorite apps. Of course, they still use other apps as well. So this is from a study that my research partner and I did this past summer, and YouTube being by far the most popular app used by middle and high school students in our survey. But then again, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram right there as well. So super popular, right? How many of you guys never heard of Discord? Never heard of Discord? All right. Yeah, Twitch. These are the up and comings. These are where a lot of young people are spending some of their time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Snapchat. Again, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on particular apps, but Snapchat is super popular these days. Remember, many years ago, Snapchat came out and it was marketed as this way for you to send content, particularly pictures, to your friends or others, and they would disappear after a certain amount of time, right? You could set the little dial here. I sent this picture to you. You look at it for 5 seconds, it disappears, never to be seen again, right? Well, no, not necessarily. It was marketed as kind of the alternative to Instagram or Facebook or these platforms where you post your content and they remain forever, or at least a longer lifespan than a few seconds. Well, now, of course, you can set it so that the person receiving the image can see it forever, an infinite, no limit to how long they can see it. But a lot of times we're just posting content, images to our story, right? And then it's visible on Snapchat for 24 hours, all right? And I don't know about you, but I'm basically sending goofy selfies to my friends all day long. This is my buddy Samir. He's the one I do all my research with. when Snapchat first came out, I said, hey, send me a funny snap, right? We got to play around with these things so we understand them. He did. And now he's in my presentation 10 years later, or 8 years later, or whatever it's been. So we know that those images don't disappear. Hopefully, if you've got older kids who are using Snapchat, they realize, even if they put that little 1-second timer on it, they don't disappear, right? People can take screen grabs. There used to actually be apps you could download in the App Store that would automatically catalog every snap you received and put it in a nice, neat little folder. They've removed those apps, but obviously that technology exists. Here's what we know, and there's some things that we don't know. We know that if I take a picture in Snapchat and I send it to you and tell it to disappear after 5 seconds, after that image disappears, okay, that image is still on my phone. Okay, it's not easy to find. It's not in my little photo app, but it's on my phone in a hidden folder. If you know where to look and you have a little bit of software, you can find it. But it's there for sure, 100%. It's a little more tricky whether it's still on your phone. That kind of depends on your device and your operating system. But I'm sure by now you've heard the examples of a lot of people getting arrested for the ridiculous things that they've posted on Snapchat. So remind your kids if they're I don't really have a inherent problem with Snapchat, as long as, and that's probably mostly true of a lot of the apps, as long as our kids recognize the potential problems they might run into if they are sharing inappropriate content, right? Do you guys know about SnapMap? Okay, SnapMap, right? This has been around for a few years now. You can look up all your friends on a map where they're located in Snapchat. This is a functionality in Snapchat, right? So this, like I said, came out a few years ago. So I thought that's interesting. So I pulled myself up here, right? And so this is me in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, right? And this is what I expected to see is, a dot or an emoji on a city. It's like, okay, Patchin's in Eau Claire, fine. Well, what I didn't realize is you can pinch in, right? You can zoom in. And so then this is me at the university, right? And my office is pretty much right where my forehead is, okay? And so it's like, it's one thing to know what city somebody's in, but it's another thing to know what part of what building somebody is in. That kind of creeped me out a little bit. So the next logical thing I would do, of course, is look up my friend Samir, right? So he's in Florida, nice warm West Palm Beach. So I zoomed in on him, right? He's got a nice little avatar that he's way ahead of the game than me. So I took a screenshot of this and I texted it to him and I said, how far off is this? He said, that's my freaking house, right? So understand the capability of the apps you're using or your kids are using. I will say that when I talk with at least high school students, when they use Snapchat, generally they don't have this turned on. They have their phone in ghost mode, or they have their location services turned off for this. They might turn it on if they are going to a sporting event or a Taylor Swift concert or something, whatever, just to see which of their friends are there. I will say though too, I think Snapchat has a habit of changing this setting on you and not telling you, because this was like a month ago. I was looking at my Snapchat, which I don't use that often, and for some reason, my location was visible. I'm like, I turned this off, but people could see me. So check your app, check your kids' apps. And I'll talk more about some of these other issues a little bit later, okay? I want to transition, talk a little bit about bullying quickly, so I can talk about cyberbullying, which is a lot of what I study. So what is bullying? Well, I think we all know what bullying is. It's being mean, hurtful, disrespectful. I think everybody in here has probably experienced bullying in some way, right? Maybe you've been bullied. When you were in school, or even as an adult, obviously these things can continue. Maybe you've done or said things to others that you realized after the fact could be considered bullying. Maybe you're like me and it was both. When I was in middle school, I was being bullied. And then to get the heat off myself, I turned around and bullied this other kid. Of course, that backfired. Not only was I being bullied, then I got in trouble for bullying this other kid. But we've seen it happen. We've maybe dealt with it with our kids, right? One issue, concern I see lately is distinguishing bullying from other sort of hurtful behavior that might occur, between peers. And for me, to distinguish hurtful behavior from bullying, the key is really intent and repetition, right? Because if I'm walking down the hallway at school and Biff accidentally bumps into me and my books go flying, if it was legitimately an accident, like legitimately, I don't think anybody would consider that bullying, right? I mean, he was not paying attention, or hopefully he apologized, but we wouldn't consider that bullying. So just because, even if he hurt me, like even if I'm physically hurt, if it was an accident, not intentional, we wouldn't consider that bullying. But even in my view, if I'm walking down the hallway and Biff purposefully shoves me into the lockers, my books go flying, I land on the floor, if that's a one-time thing, if that never happened before and it never happens again, I wouldn't consider that bullying. It's assault, right? Biff should be punished, okay? But it's not bullying, because if it happens once, I'm upset about it. I might even be physically hurt by it. But if I come to school tomorrow and Biff doesn't say anything to me, and 2 days later and Biff doesn't even look at me, a week later nothing happens, I'm going to get over it pretty quickly. But it's really that repetitive nature of bullying that makes it so much more harmful, right? Because if something bad happens to me the next day and then the third day, now my perspective completely changes. And I'm going to avoid certain areas of the school, right? I'm not going to go to my locker because Biff's is 2 doors down. And I'm sitting in math class. I have no idea what x squared means. But I know where Biff is, because I know if I run into him or one of his cronies, it's going to be a bad day for me, right? That's what the repetitive nature of bullying does. It takes that harm and it makes the target think about it constantly. And they're trying to avoid these kinds of things, right? Well, what is cyberbullying? Well, it's basically taking all the technology that we know our young people have and using them to bully, to be mean, to be hurtful, to be disrespectful. It includes a lot of the relational forms of aggression that have been going on for generations, just a much more efficient tool to carry this out. Okay, so Samir and I have done lots of research. We've written a bunch of books, written a lot of academic articles. But I thought I'd talk about one study that we did in 2020 of tweens. Okay, so we actually just collected data this past summer. I'll talk a little bit about that. But this was the first study, like national study of tweens, so 9 to 12-year-olds on cyberbullying. So Cartoon Network actually called us because they had done a study on bullying a few years before. They said, hey, what do you know about cyberbullying in tweens? And we said, we've never studied tweens. All of our research, well, the vast majority of our research has been basically 12 to 17-year-olds. And we look at the literature and nobody's really studied tweens systematically, and they said, well, let's do it. So we got a grant from the AT&T Foundation, we partnered with Cartoon Network, and we did a survey of about 1,000 tweens across the United States. And the first thing we asked them was how much technology they had, right? And not surprisingly, these tweens had technology, they had access to it, okay? The smartphone one was an interesting one for me, because 42% of 9 to 12-year-olds had access to their own smartphone, right? Now, if you break that down by age, okay, only about 1 in 5 9-year-olds had a smartphone, but 2/3 of 12-year-olds had a smartphone. Okay, so the tween years are the years that are getting these devices. And for me, our son was 10 years old at the time, and he's like, well, all my classmates have smartphones, how come I can't have one? I said, well, all your classmates do not have smartphones because only 1/3, and he didn't buy the bar graph, I don't know. Maybe his class is just, I don't know, but it was unconvincing for him. But this is certainly developmentally the time. And this is one of the questions I get a lot, and we'll touch on this a little bit more at the end. But what age is the best age to give your kid a smartphone, right? And I've been asked that question probably 1.7 billion times, right? Lots over the last 15, 20 years. And yet, I still don't have a good answer, right? Because it varies so much by the kid and by the family and by the situation. So my response to when you should get your child their first smartphone has always been, get your kid a phone at an age that's a little bit younger than what your gut is telling you is the right time, okay? Because your gut is probably saying, well, I'll give them a cell phone when they turn 35. Maybe 31. You want to wait, you're just going to delay, right? The problem with that is if you wait too long, there are some problems with it, okay? First of all, developmentally speaking, children, that sort of developmental period, are very much attached to the parents, right? For the most part, they'll listen to you, they'll follow your rules, they want to please you, right? For the most part, okay? Adolescence is a much different animal, right? Adolescence is when they start moving away from the family more towards the peer group and listening to them and paying attention to them. So if you wait too long into adolescence and you give them this device, they're going to learn all the bad habits, all the bad things to do from their friends. Whereas if you give it to them when they're still sort of in that childhood stage, which could be 11, 12, even 13 or 14, depending on your kid, they're going to be more willing to submit to whatever rules you put in place, okay? They're going to be super excited to be able to even get the phone. You could put a lot of restrictions on it, and they're not going to fight you that much for it, okay? I'll talk about some more of those a little bit later, okay? But you do want to ease them into it, right? You do want to put some guardrails on it because you don't want to give them a full-fledged, brand new iPhone because you wouldn't give your 16-year-old who just got their driver's license, a Corvette, right? And if you would, please adopt me. You give them something that they can sort of learn from, and not as much power and not as much risk. So you got to dial back the capability of some of these phones these days. But anyways, so we not surprisingly found that the tweens were experiencing cyberbullying, right? About 15% had said they'd been cyberbullied. About 3% admitted that they'd done it to others. It was affecting them pretty dramatically. We don't really know what to compare this to because we've never studied it before. So hopefully we'll collect more data in the future to see how these trends are continuing. In our research on middle and high school students, we can see that cyberbullying has been increasing over the last 7, 8 years, right? Shockingly, to me, school bullying has actually gone down. Now, we're not surprised that school bullying went down during the pandemic. That we expected because kids weren't in school. What was very surprising to us, and again, we just collected these data a few months ago, is that school bullying remains low. In all of our research, school bullying has always been more prevalent, has affected more kids than cyberbullying until these last 2 years. And I don't know, we can talk afterwards if you've got some theories about why school bullying is still low, but we'll continue to track it. I would have bet money that the school bullying would have gone back up. But I just wrote a blog post a week or two ago talking about the fact that the cyberbullying behaviors continue to increase. And in this most recent study, we asked those who have been cyberbullied how it affected them. And I think we're at the point now where we understand the negative consequences of cyberbullying and why we should prevent it. I will say that it wasn't always that way. I mean, certainly for generations, my generation and earlier, we really didn't recognize bullying as a problem. It's just sort of a rite of passage, or boys will be boys, right? And probably for the first 10 plus years of me studying cyberbullying, people really didn't take it seriously. Some people still say, oh, it's no big deal, it's just text, just delete it. But it is definitely a big deal for the person who's experiencing it, okay? Let's talk about some of the other issues that young people could face online and how we can kind of protect them from it. When it comes to social media, specifically, again, I don't have sort of an inherent problem with social media as long as it's used appropriately, as long as the rules are followed, and as long as we recognize kind of where that information is going. And so, just for example, well, first of all, your child needs to be 13 or older to be on any of these apps, technically. That's not an app rule, that's a federal law. Okay, I know there's lots of kids under 13 who are on Instagram and using Snapchat. That's something you're gonna have to work out with your kids. But let's say your 13-year-old has an Instagram page, right, or profile. If they have that profile set to private, okay, meaning only those they accept as friends or family followers, basically, can see what they're posting. And then if they only accept as friends or followers those people they know and trust in the real world, right, family members or best friends, then they'll probably be fine. Okay, again, assuming they use some common sense. But the problem is there tends to be this unwritten rule where the more followers you have online, the more popular you are in the real world, right? You think that's true? You think some people think that's true? Yeah, right, of course. So we tend to accumulate friends and followers, and it's like, that one friend at school that we don't know that well, or we're playing a game online, or at a party one time, we're handing out our Snap to everybody who's there, right? Next thing you know, you got all these followers on your profile. Some of them you know, some of you don't know. Okay? Then you post all sorts of ridiculous information, pictures, videos, blogs. Now all these people you don't know all that well have access to all this stuff. That's where it potentially could get you into some trouble, right? So we'll talk about some examples of this. This is one of my favorite stories. This is from a while ago. This is an oldie but a goodie. But what do we have here? We have a young man who is standing on the lettuce, and this is at a Burger King. Okay, this was posted anonymously to one of the more notorious anonymous online spaces. And by the way, I was sharing this example with a fifth grader last spring, or a fifth grade group, and I said, oh, it's one of these more notorious anonymous spaces, and this fifth grader in the front row jumped up and said exactly which site it was, and I was like, well, thank you very much for outing that site. But anyway, so they know. So posted completely anonymous to the site. Well, really? Was it completely anonymous? Is anything really anonymous when it comes to technology, right? So we know, for example, if you take a picture with your phone, okay, there's certain information digitally embedded in that image, right? It's called EXIF data or metadata. So it's like the date, the time, some of the characteristics of the image. There's all sorts of data there, actually. Okay. Also, potentially the location where you took that picture. Depending on your device and the settings, it could be the specific GPS coordinates of where you were standing when you took that picture, which is kind of fun, right? Helpful in some circumstances, but also potentially problematic, right? That information is there. So people who know more about technology than even I do quickly found out that this picture was taken in Mayfield Heights, Ohio, okay, by looking at the EXIF data on the image, okay? Now, but there was a kind of a big debate about this online. It's like, well, how do we know this is a Burger King in Mayfield Heights? Maybe they bought their phone in Mayfield Heights. Maybe the cell phone was bouncing off a tower in Mayfield Heights. I don't know anything about Mayfield Heights, Ohio. Maybe there's 5 Burger Kings. So there was a lot of debate about this, about whether this was actually where it was. So a much clearer, or should I say crisper version of this image was circulating online than what you can see with the projectors and the screens here, right? And after a couple of days, somebody made the brilliant observation that if you look at that barcode on that box right there, it'll tell you exactly which store it was sent to. So within 3 days of this being posted anonymously online, the 3 people who were responsible were all fired. So the guy in the picture, the person that took the picture, and their manager, they're all fired. So this is really kind of important to convey to our kids. Nothing is ever really anonymous. When it comes right down to it, there's always somebody who can figure out where that came from. Now, again, there's virtual private networks. There's ways to cover your tracks, but there's always ways, if you're willing to put in enough resources, to figure out kind of where those things were eventually. So, do you ever feel like, people are listening in? We know if you do a Google search for Nike shoes, you're going to start getting ads for Nike shoes, right? We know that. That's like old school. But what if you just say Nike shoes, Nike shoes, Nike shoes? Are you going to start getting ads for Nike shoes? Mm-hmm. You probably will. And I'll give you an example. I'll talk more about that. So I was in my office at the university. This was a few years ago. And a friend of mine I was taking a break, and so I was doing some work, but I was taking a break. I was on my phone, and I was just looking through Twitter, back when it was Twitter. And my friend had tweeted that he got stung by a bee. And I tweeted him back and said, are you sure it was a bee? It's probably a yellow jacket. Those mean, nasty hornet things? Man, they hurt. So he tweeted me back. He says, I don't know what it was, but it hurt. Okay, so I went on my phone. I went to Wikipedia. I found a picture of a yellow jacket, and I texted it to him, right? And he texted me right back, and he said, yeah, I didn't get a good look at the guy. Fine, whatever. I go back to do my work. At the time I was doing my work, I was listening to Pandora, the internet radio, right? And the very next commercial that came on Pandora was got a problem with Yellow Jackets? Call Will Kill Pest Control, we can help. So within 5 minutes of this Twitter and text exchange on my phone, I was already being advertised to on my office desktop computer. I just shook my head and I took a screenshot because that's what I do. And a few months later, that same friend texted me this, and he said, we made one of these this afternoon, no posts on social media about it at all. This ad just shows up on my Instagram. What the heck? What the heck? If this hasn't happened to you, it will start happening to you, and you're going to notice it. So what do we know? Here's what we know. We know that if you use certain apps, you've given these apps permission to use your camera and your microphone and your location. You can turn those things off, okay? I don't believe that Mark Zuckerberg is literally listening into our conversation right now. He's got better things to do, but I do believe he's got computers doing it, and he's got algorithms that are listening for certain words. I also believe they're smarter now than they were a few years ago and giving me that advertisement within 5 minutes, and they'll wait a few days, or they'll try to sort of mask the extent to which they know this information, but they certainly are listening. So that, again, another principle for your kids. Nothing's anonymous. Somebody is always watching. Somebody's paying attention, because your kids, particularly when they're in adolescence, right, they want to explore certain websites, they need to realize there's always a record of that attached to their username, to their device. Would they feel comfortable with their parents or others, realizing the places they're visiting? Because people are always paying attention, okay? And sometimes what they're posting online can come back to haunt them in terms of future opportunities. This was an associate head football coach at Penn State, dropped another prospect to Sam due to his social media presence. Actually glad I got to see the real person before we offered him. This kid was going to get a full ride scholarship to play football in the Big Ten. Coach sees something online he doesn't like, lost the scholarship. That's crazy, right? That's wild. And I've seen what he posted. It was pretty bad. But I mean, these are 17-year-old kids, making probably the same mistakes we made, just in a lot more visible fashion. So it's definitely a lot of examples of, these kinds of things happening. I do want to talk about moral education. This is something, parents, I think, have an obligation. I've been kicking this around. I haven't done any research on it, but I just want to run it by you. Maybe we could talk about it. So we want to move, when it comes to these inappropriate behaviors, we want to move from shouldn't to wouldn't. Okay, let me explain this to you, my thought process on this. It's one thing for our child to say, I shouldn't bully someone because I might get in trouble. Or I shouldn't post this online because, somebody might see it. It's a different thing for them to say, I wouldn't bully someone, or I would never post that kind of content, or I would never share that kind of picture, right? From shouldn't to wouldn't. With wouldn't, it becomes this moral issue. Like, I just would not do it. So we all have this sort of moral line that we would not cross. Certain things that we just would never do. We've established that, we've developed that over time, maybe through parenting, maybe through religious institutions, mentors, teachers, whatever it is, right? And it takes time. So we need to instill in our kids that moral sort of compass, because they're going to have a lot of opportunities to do a lot of things that could get them into trouble, and we want them to choose not to do that, okay? So that leads me to this other sort of weird concept that I just invented called vicarious supervision. We collected some data on this. I wrote a blog post on this, but I haven't really gone public with it too much because I don't like the term vicarious supervision. I'm trying to come up with a different term. Let me tell you what I'm talking about, and we can maybe chat about it. So, if you have, as a parent, okay, if you have a strong bond with your child, emotional attachment, right? In childhood, they want to please you, they're going to follow your rules, they're typically, again, not going to misbehave right in front of you because they value your relationship. They don't want to make you upset because of that emotional bond, right? So if you tell them, I don't want you drinking alcohol until you're 21, when they're 14 or 15, you're not going to crack open a Busch Light right in front of you. As if Busch Light's actually alcohol, but anyways, they're not going to do that right in front of you because they don't want to upset you, right? Because you've told them that this is bad, this is something you don't value, not a good thing to do. They don't want to make you mad, right? So what my idea of vicarious supervision is basically that relationship that you have with them, that bond, will then carry over to situations where you're not directly supervising them, right? So they might be 20 miles away hanging out with their friends. Friend offers them a Busch Light, and they're going to stop to think, well, no, Mom really, she wouldn't like it if she knew that I did this. So it's basically they're acting as if they're being supervised in the moment, even when they're not. That's the vicarious nature of it. And it doesn't even have to be parents. It could be their soccer coach, or it could be their church leader, or whatever. This relationship that they have with this respected adult, that's what works in this. Okay, that's what they're relying on. Because we can discipline much more effectively and I guess less severely when we have a really strong relationship with that child. Okay, so when I was growing up in northern Minnesota, I was probably 14 or 15. I knew I didn't have a license. I couldn't drive a car yet. And I was driving my four-wheeler, my ATV, from my house to the arena in my small town in northern Minnesota, because every small towns in northern Minnesota have a hockey rink, right? So I'm driving to the rink to meet up with some of my friends, and I was talking to some of my friends, probably there for 10 minutes or so, and a police officer walks into the arena, and he pulls me aside, and he starts yelling at me. Because I was, driving my four-wheeler on the city streets, which was illegal, and you were speeding, you were going so fast, and I went to your house, and I was going to give you a ticket, and he's laying into me, right? And I felt terrible. I really did. I didn't feel like I was speeding, but I'm not going to litigate that 30 years later. But I genuinely felt bad. And you want to know why I felt bad? Because this police officer was my hockey coach, right? I mean, he was in uniform, he was working, but I wasn't upset that this cop was going to give me a ticket. He didn't have to give me a ticket, right? He knew he didn't. I felt bad about it because of the relationship we had. And from then on, I'd be like driving 5 miles an hour, and my friends would make fun of me for it, but I didn't want to upset him again, right? So that police officer, 30 years later, is now the police chief of my hometown, and I see him about once a year, and I shake his, hey Patch, how's it going? I shake his hand. I've never told him that I occasionally bring up that story. Someday I will, but it only worked because of the nature of the relationship, right? So that's why it's really important that we have these relationships. Talk to your kids. This is actually another picture of my son. I forgot this was in here. This is from 6 or 7 years ago. Talk with them about all these issues. This is an opportunity for you to do that. Say, oh, I heard about this. I heard about Snapchat. I heard about bullying. So I had this pattern of behavior. So I would... my wife would drop him, our son off at school. I would pick him up, right? So he goes to a Catholic school. And so I got into this habit when he was in kindergarten, right? I said, oh, how was, same two questions I would ask him every day. Oh, how was your day? Good. Was there any bullying? Right? And I'd have this sort of conspiratorial eye, because daddy needs new research, right? Any bullying? Oh, no bullying, no bullying. Like literally every day I would pick him up, I would ask him the same two questions, and it became sort of this joke. When he got into about 3rd or 4th grade, he kind of got tired of it, so I'd ask him the same. He got annoyed by it, an annoyed 3rd grader. So I kind of stopped asking him. Then when he was in 4th or 5th grade, I picked him up, and we're driving home, and he says, well, what do you usually ask me after school? I said, I don't know, how was your day? Well, what else do you ask me? I don't know, I don't remember. Was there any bullying? And he handed me a note that he had written, and it was folded up, like painstakingly folded up, and on the top of the note was, for Dad about bullying, right? And I opened it up, and it was this long, for like a 4th grader, like a full page of bullying that had happened at school that day. He wasn't being bullied, but one of his friends was. And so we talked about it, and did you tell your teacher? Yes. You feel like the teacher handled it okay? Yes. And so this was the opportunity. So take advantage of any opportunity you have to set up these kinds of conversations so that when something does happen, they feel open to talk with you about these things. Let's see. Oh, I want to talk just briefly about, so a lot of times parents ask me about apps. I don't talk a lot about apps because I'm not really a big fan. Well, here, I'm definitely not a fan of spying on your kids. Okay, but certainly putting kind of guardrails on. There's a lot of apps you can, I'm not sponsored by any of these apps, okay, and a lot of them, the best ones cost a lot of money too, but you can do all sorts of things. You can restrict sites, you can track where they are, you can actually log messages and all sorts of things. But there are also free tools that you can use On an Android phone, it's Google Family Link. On an Apple phone, an iPhone, it's Apple Screen Time. So I'm going to give you just quickly a couple of examples of things you can do, so of things that we've done. So in an iPhone, if you go into settings, right, and you click on family, okay, you add your child as a family member, right, so there's my son, okay, then you can, sort of regulate the things he can do and his screen time, for example, right? So if you click on screen time, you can set it so he can only use his phone so it basically turns off at 9 p.m. right? And so it turns on when he wakes up. You could set it so that he can't use it during school hours. You have all sorts of restrictions here, right? So basically he cannot access. If he wants to use it after 9 p.m., right? Oh, and then you can also go in and do different apps. So like he can only use TikTok for 1 hour. He can only play certain games for 1 hour every day. All these things you can manage for free on your device, right? If he wants more screen time after 9 o'clock, oh, I forgot about this. You can track all the screen time, what he's doing, how many hours, days, what his most commonly used apps are. But then if he wants more screen time, he texts you. So this is a text I get just about every single day at 9 p.m. saying he wants more YouTube time, right? So it's like, all right, you give him an extra 15 minutes, you can give him an extra hour, you keep it open for the rest of the day. And then this was not too long ago. It was like 9:30. It's like, you wanted more? I was like, really? He's like, yes. So I'm like, it's almost 9:30. I don't know. This is your last time. Thanks. So you can have this sort of dialogue with them about the screen time and say, okay, this is getting kind of late. You need to manage how much. So I can go back and talk to them. Well, you were on this device for 4 hours yesterday. So when it comes to screen time, we don't get too bent out of shape about kind of the raw number of hours. We focus more on what you're doing, whether you got a good night's sleep, whether you did something physically active, whether you got your homework done, whether you got your household responsibilities done. And frankly, if they've gotten all their other stuff done, watching some appropriate, Mr. Beast YouTube videos is probably fine. But, again, you have to decide what's appropriate for your family. All right, so we got some time for questions. That's my contact information. That's my direct email at the university. You can stalk me on social media. What other questions do you have about young people and what they're doing? Yes?
So I'm the father of an 11-year-old boy.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. They're pretty good. But
that's good.
I guess one of the things I'm looking for is, what does this bullying really look like? Online cyberbullying.
Yeah.
We all know what it looks like in school.
Yeah.
For us boys, it was physical.
Uh-huh.
For the girls, I think, from what I observed, it was more sort of reputation or rumor, that sort of stuff. And I'm just wondering, is it similar online? And if so, what does it look like?
There's a lot of ways to answer that question. It is very similar online. Of course, not the physical aspect of it, but the rumors, the gossip. The comments are the big thing, the hurtful comments to a page. It can be even more subtle online because it's like, well, you're not in this chat group, or you're not invited to this, profile. But most of the time it's hurtful comments. Sometimes it's threats. Occasionally it's emails or messages directed towards somebody saying very hurtful things. But here's the good thing about cyberbullying compared to the bullying that we all experienced. With cyberbullying, by definition, there's always evidence. Always, right? So another thing to tell your child, if they're being cyberbullied, take the screenshot, save those messages. The other thing you can do is empower your kids, show them how to report it to the site, how to block the person, how to mute them. But related to that, sort of keeping the evidence, it's really important that you remind your kids not to retaliate. Because this is the most common thing I see happen. It's like, I'm saying mean things to you and you fire back and say mean things back to me. It's just sort of the nature of adolescence, right? So you got to remind them that, look, just like you can save these messages, other people can too. So don't retaliate, but save the messages. And even if it's not that big of a deal, I would save them. If it's a classmate, if it's somebody from the school, you might want to bring the school involved. That gets a little tricky because your kids are probably, no, you can't tell anybody at the school. They'll get kind of worried about that. But hopefully you have somebody at the school that they trust that you can talk to about it. But to go back to your original question, it can look like a lot of things, but tell your kids ahead of time if you're being mistreated in any way. Take a screenshot, save the messages, because it'll be a lot easier to deal with if you can actually see what exactly is happening. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Oh, there the hands go up. All right. Oh, yeah.
Do you have any recommendation on how much screen time you think is appropriate for different bands and ages? Right? Like I know kids are starting to get their hands on iPhones
Yeah.
and phones at 1 year old sometimes.
Yeah.
It's all the way up to 18 plus.
Yeah, I don't. And I just heard, I think it was on NPR yesterday, talking about how these phones are killing our eyes. Like a bunch of kids are becoming nearsighted now or something. So the anatomical, biological consequences of screen time are something completely different. But I know I wrote a blog post right at the beginning of COVID, because a lot of parents were putting their kids in front of screens just so they could function, just so they could work, and then they were on Google Classroom all day long. And my advice back then was, relax. It's not that big of a deal. If you need to put your kid in front of a video to get some stuff done, you got to do that. I'm more concerned about the quality of what they're doing online than the quantity. Now, look, 12 hours in front of a screen is a bad idea. 12 hours, honestly, sitting and reading a book is probably a bad idea for a 10 or 12-year-old, honestly. So again, they need to be more physically active. They need to diversify their activities in a day. Certainly, start when they're younger, giving them X number of minutes or hours, and then give them more time as they earn it, as they earn that privilege. Like we said, for a number of years, we limited our kid to an hour a day on these games or an hour a day on YouTube, because you just don't want them staring at the screens for 10 hours a day. But it's really hard, for different ages and different situations. And frankly, we just don't know a lot of the consequences, the anatomical, biological consequences. Yeah. Question, yeah.
Yeah. Are there any concerns with the rise of AI, with how that's going to affect cyberbullying and predator behaviors?
Yeah.
Something up in your neck of the woods recently. My mom was in Waupaca, so
Oh.
I heard she sent me something about something that happened in Appleton or Green Bay, I can't remember, where somebody was trying to groom somebody.
Yeah.
And they were saying that, if they didn't do this, then they would use AI to create content that was using the girl's face.
Yeah. The bad actors are certainly going to take advantage of all the tools they have access to. Yeah, there's already apps that'll remove clothing. There's already apps so we've seen some examples of, frankly, adults. I don't know if I've seen an example of a kid doing this to another kid, but there was one case where a mom took a picture of a classmate of this girl, like a cheerleading picture, and then basically made her naked, using AI and or using a different kind of image I don't know what the purpose of that was, but the short answer is yes. So people are going to be using these tools. I feel like, just like anything, there are going to be tools that we can use to sort of counteract those. So I'm sort of bullish when it comes to the technology. In all the ways it can be used to do bad things, we can create ways to do good things with it. So ever since the first data set we ever collected, back in probably 2001 or 2002, we've had computer scientists contact us and say, hey, we'd love your data because we're making this new better mousetrap for identifying cyberbullying. And back then I was like, no, you're not. I mean, cyberbullying is so contextual, and I'm going to kill you could mean a lot of different things. Could be a best friend thing, could be. But I will tell you, in the last 3 to 5 years, the technology is getting really good for identifying, certainly identifying explicit content. That's really easy to do now. And even some of the bullying. I was in a meeting with a tech company, this was 5-6 years ago, and they had said, oh yeah, we block all hurtful content before it even goes on the app. I'm like, how can you even do that in real time? So I was sitting next to a friend of mine in the meeting, and I messaged her in the app, and I said, why are you such a insert negative word here? And she never got it. And then just to test it, I said, why are you so cool? And she got it immediately. So, and I even kind of, played with it. So what I'm saying is, I think these tools can be used for good and to moderate some of these negative problems. But this is a challenge that we're living in, because we're all guinea pigs, and these these apps and the technology is just changing so quickly. Yeah, but AI is definitely and the metaverse, this sort of virtual reality, augmented reality, that's another place we've been kind of studying how these behaviors are happening. Yeah. What else? All right, yeah.
I also work at a school in a different district, so I'm here as a parent and as a
Nice.
person who teaches this topic. But I'm curious to know if it's, I have a lot of students, I am in an elementary school, who say, oh, well, someone's bullying me online. They're in, Minecraft or whatever, and it's the same people who are always coming after them and, doing some awful thing to them in the game.
Yeah.
Is that still considered cyberbullying when they don't really know who it is? Right word to use?
Well, it gets tricky in gaming environments because sometimes it's a part of the culture. It would meet our definition of cyberbullying if it happens repeatedly. But what we find in our research is, and you can tell me if this is what you're experiencing with the students you're talking with, when they don't know who it is, it doesn't seem to bother them all that much. It's like, oh, this is just some person online, just some random person in the game, or this troll or whatever. It doesn't seem to bother them that much. It bothers adults a lot more, I'll tell you that much. Like when adults get mistreated online, I get a lot of emails from adults saying so-and-so, some random stranger saying bad things about me. But what really bothers the kids is when they know, or at least think they know, it's somebody from their school or somebody from their network based on what they're saying. So yes, it probably meets the definition, but typically it doesn't bother the kids as much when it's just that kind of stranger thing. So I would ask them, I would say, well, is that bothering you? And make sure they know how to block the person on Minecraft or how to report them to the app, because abusive behavior would violate the terms of service of all these games, all the legitimate games. It would violate the terms of service. Yeah.
They say they try that, and then the bullies will create new
Yeah.
accounts.
That's the common problem. We're doing a study with another social media company, and we surveyed some kids about that. Oh, they'll just create a new profile. And so they're talking about like IP banning or device banning, because the social media companies, not only do they have your IP address, right? They have your device ID, so they know what specific device you're using. So if you create a new profile with that same device, it's not going to work. And a lot of, they could use a different device, right? But a lot of the better companies are requiring login with a phone number, so that kind of prevents that. But sometimes they're not. But again, if they just keep blocking them, it's easy to block them. And sometimes they don't want to block them because they still want to play the game, or they want to, so that's a whole other challenge. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for before a kid gets a smartphone or access to the internet?
Yeah, I would ease them into it. Maybe, obviously modeling appropriate behavior yourself, and not having it on all the time and not being distracted by it. But maybe you show them some games or apps that you think are appropriate for them. iPads or other tablets or devices that don't have maybe internet connection. So we gave our son an old iPhone that didn't have a cellular plan. It only worked in our house with the Wi-Fi network, right? So we could limit the games he played. We could just take it away from him. And so I think easing into the device, and even for younger kids who are 7, 8, 9, 10, it gives them the ability to show you that they can use this device responsibly and not be too distracted by it, so that when they do get that full-fledged iPhone, even then put some restrictions on it, with the screen time and blocking certain things, and then that open line of communication. When I first let our son on YouTube, I really sort of, so I'm on an advisory board for YouTube Kids, and I said, okay, so here's YouTube. We got your account on YouTube Kids, and if you see anything inappropriate, you gotta let me know, because I gotta tell YouTube, that they gotta fix their systems. So he's never showed me anything, but it opens up that line of communication. So kids are afraid to come to us, if they see something inappropriate, or if somebody's being mean to them. They think that we're just gonna take away the device, take away their access to the app. We have to convey to them that, look, we're just trying to protect them, keep them safe, and if anything bad happens, come to us. Because the really bad things that happen usually stem from kids doing something they probably shouldn't have done, and then not feeling safe to tell somebody about it, especially a parent, and then it just escalates, and that's when the really bad things happen. So yeah, ease them into it with some other device if you can, to get them used to how to use it, and then the fact that there's going to be restrictions on it. Yeah.
Have you done research on if cyberbullying is worse than face-to-face bullying?
That is another question I get all the time, and the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. So if somebody's been cyberbullied, they're going to say it was terrible. Some people say, well, it's not physical, you weren't physically hurt, but obviously we've seen the significant negative consequences of some young people who experience cyberbullying. So what we found in our research is both can be really bad. One interesting finding is we asked kids if they felt safe at school, right? We asked students if they felt safe at school. Those students who had never been bullied at school or cyberbullied, they hadn't experienced any bullying, 95% of them said they felt safe at school. Okay, that's good, 95%. Among those who were bullied at school, I don't remember the exact numbers, but about 80% said they felt safe at school. Okay, among those who were cyberbullied, 65% felt safe at school. So it's kind of hard to visualize that because I've got a bar chart in some of my other presentations. But basically what this means is the kids who are being cyberbullied felt less safe at school. That surprised us. We thought, well, those kids who are being bullied at school would feel less safe at school. And so anytime we encounter a finding in our research that doesn't match up with our expectations, we talk with kids, we talk with teens, and we ask them, well, what's the deal with this? And they said, well, if I'm being bullied at school, I know who's doing it, I know how to avoid it, I know kind of where I need to be. If I'm being bullied online, sometimes I don't know who's doing it. A lot of times I do, but sometimes I don't. But even if I know who's doing it, I don't know who all's in on the joke. I don't know who's seen it. I walk into this room and everybody's staring at me. Is that because they all saw this joke online about me? Or, so they are more fearful about it when they don't know who's doing it or who's been involved. So that's just one example. But the short answer is I've seen really tragic consequences for both. And the most at-risk kids, it's not rocket science, are the ones who experience both. Because then they don't feel safe at school or online, and they just feel completely isolated. Yeah. Great questions. Well, I'll wrap up, and then if you want to hang out and talk with me after, but I know that you guys are busy, and I really do appreciate you coming as busy parents, but I'll just end by saying good luck. So, thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.